The NFC East have seen an overhaul in the coaching staff ranks the last few seasons. Could this be the best group of coaches that has been in the NFC East? And with the NBA draft coming and going last night, I took a look at who could potentially be a starting five made out of all these Eagles players. There's quite some athletes on this team. All that and more on today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in, everybody, to another edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm your host, Gino Cammilleri. As always, Lou DiBiase is on his yearly lake vacation with all of his friends, so safe travels to Lou. I'm going to be here taking you into the weekend. The NBA draft has come and gone, and I had an idea. What if I took a look at this Eagles roster and see who could be the best starting five made up of linemen, maybe a corner, maybe a receiver or two, quarterback, maybe a running back, who knows? There are athletes on this Philadelphia Eagles team, and the person in charge of putting those athletes in position to succeed on the field is head coach Nick Sirianni. Looking at the ranks of the coaches around the NFC East, things look vastly different than they have in the past couple seasons. Just a few years ago, if you look at it, the Eagles were coached by Doug Peterson. Jason Garrett was the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Jay Gruden was the head coach of Washington. And man, I mean, the Giants had a bunch of different guys between Ben McAdoo, Joe Judge. I mean, did they ever really have confidence in any of those guys? I'm not 100% sure. But now in Brian Daboll, I believe there should be a confidence in the New York Giants. Ron Rivera being in Washington with that roster that they have, fans of that team should be confident. I know Lou is very high on that team. Nick Sirianni, a guy who just led his team to the playoffs with a roster that might not have been as good as many people thought it could be, has gotten increasingly better. And I would say the one potentially weak link in this whole equation, and Mike McCarthy has been around for quite some time, but he's definitely on the hot seat. Let's say that. Jerry Jones knows that this roster is in a position that they have to contend. Dak Prescott, he's not getting any younger. He's only going to get more expensive as the years go on. You just lost Amari Cooper. You lose a couple guys on the defensive line. Things aren't going to get better in terms of player personnel when it comes to keeping those core pieces around, because guys like Tyron Smith, they're only going to get older. They're only more susceptible to injuries as he goes on in his career. And they've already started to lose pieces of that offensive line. And to say that Mike McCarthy can make up for the deficiencies in a roster, I'm not 100% certain that he could do that. Looking at his track record in Green Bay, he was lucky enough to have the best quarterback in football for quite some time outside of Tom Brady as the guy slinging the rock to one of the best wide receivers in football in Devontae Adams. He comes to Dallas and inherits a roster that is already pretty well put together. You look at a lot of those pieces in that core once Jason Garrett left, a lot of them were ready to compete. The Cowboys were in a situation where they were, quote, Super Bowl contenders. Was bringing in Mike McCarthy the right move? I don't necessarily know. And right now, I would say out of all the three coaches outside of Mike McCarthy, they all have better odds to survive, in my opinion. Maybe not to Vegas's opinion, but they all have better odds to survive this season than I believe Mike McCarthy does. If Dallas gets off to a slow start, I don't think Jerry will really sit on his hands and sit on his laurels when it comes to potentially getting another guy in there that could boost that team. Now, you have to look at the other guys around you. You have Brian Daboll and you have Ron Rivera. Brian Daboll, A lot of people might not know him. He's an offensive coordinator that comes from the ranks of Buffalo, but this guy has been around. He went to Alabama, won a national championship with Nick Saban. He was on the coaching staff with Bill Belichick. He's a proven winner. And funny enough, he's another guy from Western New York. Now, 2 out of the 4 coaches in Nick Sirianni and Brian Daboll, both are from Western New York. Quite ironic that both Lou and I are as well. But getting back to it, Daboll was able to take Josh Allen and some of those deficiencies that he had early on as a passer and really hone them in. Sean McDermott is a defensive head coach. We know that. We knew it when he was a defensive coordinator in Philly that that's where he's inevitably going to end up. And he went on to the Panthers. Bean goes to Buffalo after leaving Carolina. McDermott goes there as well. And McDermott brings in Brian Daboll. And Brian Daboll has had success there calling plays for this team. I don't know how good Buffalo will be without Daboll there, but I know how much better the Giants are going to be with Brian Daboll there. You need somebody that will help Daniel Jones, to elevate Daniel Jones. And just like how I've talked about players in the past where you have to rank them in terms of tiers, are they a coach you win with? Are they a coach you win because of? Or are they a coach you win in spite of? I believe Brian Daboll is a coach that you win because of. I have given Daboll my fair share of criticism in the past. I just have to get this off my chest. At one point in a game, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, he was holding a piece of loose leaf paper calling plays. I just thought it was hilarious to see that in the NFL. But if you look at what the Bills are in terms of offense and where the rest of the league wants to go, you'd say it's 1-2, them Kansas City, and probably throw the Rams into consideration there as well. And I'd say Tampa too. But you look at the quarterback situation and Josh Allen, somebody who's a guy who likes to get outside the pocket, likes to be mobile, has the best arm in football right now. Daniel Jones doesn't have that, but Daniel Jones has been proven to give teams in the NFC East headaches with his legs. He just hasn't had a proven coordinator to hone in on the things that he might not do the best. Is he the best quarterback, in my opinion? Absolutely not. Can you get more out of Daniel Jones than you've gotten out of offensive play calling with Jason Garrett? 1,000%. We saw what Jason Garrett did in Dallas. He goes to the New York Giants, and there's a reason that if I had a genie with 3 wishes, all of them would be to keep Jason Garrett in the NFC East, outside of Philadelphia, for as long as possible. Brian Daboll is a complete 180 from that. The coaches he brought in, the player personnel staff that is there as well, with Joe Shane, they're more honed into this modern game of football than Dave Gettleman was, I would say. They're going to put Daniel Jones in a position to succeed. I would say right now, in terms of the coaches in this division, it's 2 different paradigms. You have Ron Rivera, Mike McCarthy, the old guys, the guys that have been around. They know what they're going to do. They're not going to change their ways as much. Ron Rivera, I would say, is more of a player's coach than a guy like Mike McCarthy. But you look at Nick Sirianni and Brian Daboll, 2 very young guys that are willing and open to ideas, willing to take in this collaboration from people within the organization to get the best out of the product on the field. The guys that are older, they might be more stuck in their ways. I would say the battle, and hopefully, because I'd like to see the NFC East be as good as possible, because you want your team to compete against the best so that when it comes time to get to the playoffs, you already know what it takes to beat the best. So, Brian Daboll and Nick Sirianni, I hope that these 2 have some battles going forward for years to come. And when we get back, we'll continue to talk about this. We'll talk about Nick Sirianni. Where does he stack up? Is he the number 1 coach in this division right now? And Ron Rivera, the old horse who's been kicking around forever, can he continue to get the best out of that Washington roster? All that and more. But before we do that, we have a message from our friends over at Bet Online. You know there's only one place here at the Locked On Eagles podcast and all across the Locked On Podcast Network that we place our wagers. It's the official sportsbook of the network, betonline.net. The easiest, simplest, most seamless, and I would say the most abundant user interface that I have ever seen in a sports book. I've been around wagering forever. Back in the day, my grandfather and dad used to have the pieces of paper out and bet parlays, and I would do pick'ems with them, just picking the games, not wagering. But now you can do all that and more, including player props, bet on any sport that you want. Baseball's in full swing. The NBA draft came and went, so they're going to have their summer league coming up. Those games are fun to bet on. But most importantly, go Avs, go. You know I am hammering the Avalanche money line tonight on betonline.net. You can also bet MMA, boxing, golf, whatever other sport that you enjoy. Head to betonline.net, the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network, because BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, everybody, welcome on back here to this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm your host, Gino Cammilleri, as always, joining you here wherever you get your podcast. If you get them through your headphones, if you get it on YouTube, thank you. A huge thank you to everybody. We just passed 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. Whether you've watched one show, 10 shows, 100 shows, we're about to get to 900 shows. Thank you so much for following along each and every day. This show is nothing besides two Western New York Italian kids talking into a microphone about the Philadelphia Eagles, if it isn't and wasn't for the fans. So thank you so much. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be around for a while, so continue to stay locked in. Follow us on Twitter. Follow me at GC24_football. Follow Lou at DiBiase, LOE, and follow our main page at Locked On Birds, and follow all the shows on the Locked On Podcast Network. You know I follow the Locked On Avalanche show, of course. Go Avs, go tonight. Getting back into our discussion about football, we were talking about the coaches in the NFC East. I touched on Mike McCarthy, what I thought about him. I'm very high on what Brian Daboll can bring to that New York Giants team. And I know what Ron Rivera is for that Washington team. He's a guy who's going to be a stable face, somebody that's going to be there and make sure the culture in a very toxic organization gets back on track. A lot of the things that they have done in terms of Ron Rivera and his staff, separate Daniel Snyder and everything else that's going on with that completely from the equation. But Ron Rivera, I believe, has a roster that it can't be overlooked. Carson Wentz, he might not be the best guy for the job right now. He's on his third team in the last couple of years. Everything around him is going well. They have a lot of playmakers on offense. That defense, you still have to think highly of it no matter what. Chase Young, Montez Sweat. I'm terrified. Each and every game that they play them, and it's just gotten more difficult to play the edge rushers in the NFC East over the last couple of years with the addition of Kevon Thibodeau. Tank Lawrence is especially good, but Washington can't be overlooked. And Ron Rivera, he's that coach that when you're in these games that will probably be close against Washington because they always are, you know that it isn't going to be a game when you play Jason Garrett and he fumbles the bag at the end. Ron Rivera has been in these situations. He's been in big games, and he's been in multiple winning organizations, going back to the Philadelphia Eagles. This guy just knows how to get a team to play. Even if you don't have everything going right, he's a coach that can get the best out of the players around him. And I think he's done that in Carolina. I think he's done that in Washington. I think he can do that even better going into this season. If I had to say which coach I was most terrified to play right now, it would probably be a team coached by Ron Rivera. I think a lot of Ron Rivera. I think what he's had to deal with off the field just shows how well he's able to go through adversity and overcome obstacles that outside of football are way bigger. So when you go and face obstacles in football, it's pretty easy. He's been around the game, and he's well respected. I don't think anybody on any of the NFC East shows or any of the other shows on the Locked On NFL Podcast Network would say anything bad about Ron. Right now, you'd have to say with that roster, he could probably be more competitive than what the Giants are going to bring. I still think the Giants are 1 to 2 years away in terms of getting that roster turned around. Washington's there. Just can they get the quarterback situation figured out? Can they have a stable culture that late in the season, when things and adversity hits, you're not thinking about off the field stuff? That's still a big up in the air. But Ron Rivera and what he can do, he's a coach you can win with, and he's a guy who I think can get a lot out of those players and be a guy that you win because of. So now, the last guy we're talking about, the coach in Philadelphia, Nick Sirianni, personally, I say out of all the coaches right now, it would be tough to argue that you wouldn't want to build a team with Nick Sirianni. Definitely Brian Daboll. I wanted Daboll to come here and be the offensive coordinator, potentially be the head coach. But what Sirianni did last year and overcoming a lot of the question marks that came with his hire, that's exactly what I want in a Philadelphia head coach. Not somebody who's Chip Kelly, where he wants all the shiny things, like he wants the newest weight room and newest nutrition staff and wants to overhaul the game. No, Sirianni has talked about it. He talked about running the wing tee when he was back in high school and coaching back in Western New York. The guy gets the fundamentals of football. He gets what it takes to do the little things well so that the big things can come together. Not just is he a player's coach, but he gets the X's and O's as well. He has the self-awareness to know that, hey, if he backs off and allows Shane Steichen to be the play caller going into next season, maybe he'll put his team and himself in a better situation to see the 30,000-foot view. Getting that team to the playoffs, team that probably was a year away from really competing against the rest of the league. If it wasn't for that last playoff spot, they wouldn't have been there. But they got on a run after starting 2-5. They got things going in a great direction when it comes to culture and organizational understanding of what the expectation is. The expectation is we're not here to be 4-12. The expectation is we're here to compete for a home playoff game, multiple home playoff games. Howie Roseman says it. Jeffrey Lurie says it. We're not a team that wants to be outside of the Lincoln Financial Field for multiple rounds of the playoffs. They want to host these home playoff games, and it comes through the coach. It comes through Nick Sirianni. I think for the first time in a long time, everybody in that building is on the same page, and it starts with having somebody in Nick who gets his place in the organization. He gets that Howie's been there forever and is going to be somebody who's instrumental in bringing in players, but he just has to get the best out of it. Would I say he's the best coach in the division right now? You could make the argument, track record-wise. I would say Ron Rivera is up there. I'm not the biggest Mike McCarthy proponent. I don't think many people are. I would say if you were going to give a roster like the Eagles had last year and say which of these coaches will get the best out of it, I would say Daboll, Sirianni, 1A, 1B. Ron Rivera right under them, and then a little bit of a gap in Mike McCarthy. Who would I want to be the head coach? Daboll or Sirianni. So you got one of the two guys. And who do I believe fits the Philadelphia Eagles culture the best out of all of these people? You'd probably say Ron Rivera because he's been around it. He knows. I just think Nick gets it. He just understands what it takes. Wearing the Villanova jersey, wearing the Sixers jerseys, wearing all this stuff to support the franchise, being around the organization outside and inside of the building, taking on the task of not having a roster that's your own, but not complaining about it, not being a Chip Kelly. Doug Peterson got the best out of his guys, but wasn't an X's and O's guys through and through. I think Nick Sirianni puts this team in a fantastic position to compete for multiple years. And now, the expectations are there, Nick. You have to go out and prove everybody wrong. Prove that last year wasn't just an outlier. Prove that there's a lot to get out of this Philadelphia Eagles team. And there's a lot to talk about on this Eagles podcast, on the preseason, coming up during the season. But I wanted to take a step back and take a look at something that happened outside of the NFL. Talk about the NBA. I know a lot of these guys in the Philadelphia Eagles team were recruited to play basketball as well. Who do I think to be the best starting five out of this Eagles roster? I'll take you through that and finish up all of this show and take you to the weekend so you guys can enjoy a nice Saturday and Sunday. But before we do that, we will be finishing up the Locked On Eagles podcast. Join me on the other side. I'm Gino Cammilleri. All right, everybody, welcome on back to this last segment of the Locked On Eagles podcast here on this Friday edition of the show. Gino Cammilleri, your host, as always, here on your airwaves or on your television or computer or phone, wherever you listen or watch the podcast. That's the great thing about technology. You can get this show anywhere and every single day. We're approaching 900 episodes. We just continue to churn out content, and we're in the dead zone. Just wait until July. We're hitting it hard. We're getting back into the preseason. We'll do full roster projections, position breakdowns, because less than 2 months, we'll be getting back into the swing of things in the NFL. But we're talking about the NBA right now. Big day for the Sixers yesterday. Make a pick, trade it away, get a big addition. But the thing is, we're not talking about the Sixers on the show. We're talking about the Eagles. And I want to talk about the guys who I believe would be the best starting five if I had to make a team out of players on this roster. Starting at the center, I think it's hard to look past the big Australian on the left side. Jordan Mailata, 6'6", almost 6'7", 385 pounds, arms for days, is the true team player, is the bodyguard to take over for Jason Peters and Trey Thomas. He's going to defend the hoop. He's a great athlete. He'll be able to give you a lot underneath. He's going to make sure nobody gets inside. He doesn't have top quality elite height, but he's going to be a player that if you have somebody that likes to drive to the rim, he's going to make sure he doesn't get there, and he's going to get a lot of rebounds. Guy who probably ends with 12 to 15 rebounds a game, and somebody that's going to make 155-pound point guard hate his life coming through the middle. Going to the 4 position, I went back and forth on this one. I ended up settling with Dallas Goedert, a known, very good basketball player. Dallas Goedert, 6'4", 34-inch arms. I'm going to have him run the 4. He's a physical player. You see him take licks over the middle all the time. He's going to be playing against some big-bodied players. He's going to have to be physical. He's going to get knocked around when he takes the ball to the paint. And he has a pretty good shot if you've never seen him shoot before. Dallas Goedert's a heck of an athlete. And I would take him one-on-one on this Eagles team, probably against just about anybody when it comes to who's going to back you down every single time. He's just so big and athletic. But when it comes to guys that can actually hoop and are known hoopers, when it comes to the playmaking position, I think this Eagles team is absolutely stacked. Absolutely stacked. And these guys have arguments on it all the time. So at the 3, I wanted somebody who's versatile, somebody who likes to play both sides of the ball, somebody who's going to get a lot of turnovers and be a threat to score. Darius Slay, or Slay. He never likes when people call him Darius. He corrects everybody on it. So Slay, man, this guy's going to be sticky on you in coverage. He can play wide receiver. He likes to make plays. You saw what he did in that Denver game last year. He's going to be a guy, he's going to be a stretch 3, somebody that's going to stretch out the floor, shoot from 3, be athletic up and down the court. He's as fast as anybody. He can keep up with anybody in transition, probably have 12 steals a game. I mean, who's going to want to go against Darius Slay and all that length and athleticism? Dude is a beast, absolute beast, and he's a heck of a hooper. He knows how to put the moves on. He knows how to match up against guys that have very good footwork. And one of the guys he matches up against each day in practice, the guy who I'm having at my 2, might not be the biggest guy, but a dude who just knows how to make plays and has the frame to have an unbelievably dirty shot, Devontae Smith. You look at the Heisman winner, a hell of an athlete, can go up, posterize people at the point of attack. The ball handling is going to be there with his ability to maneuver in and out of his breaks. He could get down the court, outmaneuver people that are better athletes at the 2 spot, and probably go against 1s at his size as well. And the guy I have at the 1 is the guy that's dishing him the rock, Jalen Hurts. The vision is there. The athleticism's there. A very good hooper as well in his own right. He's going to be the guy that sees Jordan Mailata down low, hits him, gets that big dunk. He's going to see Slay out in the corner three. He's going to deliver the ball to Devontae Smith. He's going to hit Dallas Goedert in transition, and he's going to make everybody's life happy when he ends up with 25 assists a game. And arguably the most important position on any basketball team, the sixth man, the guy that comes off the bench, the guy that might not be the starter but gets it done when they need things to happen, can line up at a multitude of spots, can get things done. Boston Scott might not be the biggest, but man, he gets things done. When the Eagles need a play made, it's Boston Scott. You could throw Greg Ward into that conversation as well, but B. Scott, he gets it done. He's going to be a guy who just weaves in and out of traffic just like he does behind the line of scrimmage. I think he would be a nice number one to have. I think him and Jalen Hurts would cause all sorts of havocs in the front court, getting down the court, having big guys try and defend them in open space. It would be an absolute nightmare. But one thing that the Eagles don't have is a nightmare on their hands with this roster. And you could always have a fun day and enjoy your day by listening to the Locked On Eagles podcast each and every day. Go enjoy the sunshine. Go enjoy the weekend. And thank you for tuning in to the podcast. We'll be back next week, of course, with 3 more shows. We'll get into the full season swing in July. We're going to get into preseason. We'll get into all that fun stuff. But for now, thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. But make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. Clearly, as you can see, we're always talking birds here and on Twitter. Follow along at GC24_football for myself. Follow Lou at DiBiase LOE. Follow our main page at Locked On Birds. Follow all of the Locked On Podcast Network shows. Make sure you follow us on Odyssey, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever you get the shows. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube as well to tune in to a visual version of the show. Make sure you rate, give us reviews, follow along, interact with us, because without you guys, this show is nothing. So thank you. Enjoy your weekend. I'm Gino Cammilleri signing off as always. And with that, fly Eagles fly.